This is Hard Parking, brought to you by Right Honda and Right Toyota out of Scottsdale, Arizona. Coming up on today's show, I recently went to the Vault in Scottsdale, sat down with the owner, founder, the gentleman, Ron Evans. If you're watching this on Spotify or YouTube, word of caution. I've had these issues with focus, and a large part of Ron is out of focus. However, I encourage you to stick with it. I try to run it through some AI processing, and it helped a little bit. You can see his facial expressions and other things, and it's only part of the video, a large part of the video. Now, I'd say stick with it because at the end, we walk around, and he talks about some of his favorite cars in his collection, and there's a lot of visual things that I add into the episode when he's talking about his life growing up. Incredible story. I know some of you listening actually know who Ron Evans is, but I could probably guarantee you do not know this Ron Evans because we dig into his life, his incredible journey, his health issues, and more. Before we get to this word from Arcus Foundry, congratulations to a friend of mine, Peter Cunningham, for selling his yellow Acura Integra Type R 1998, 4,800 miles on it for $204,000 on Bring a Trailer. There are some haters out there. That car's not worth that much. Well, anything is worth as much as somebody is willing to pay for it. So special congratulations to Peter for the sale. I joked with him and said that he owes us all a round of Casamigos, which is actually terrible tequila. He, like myself, is a tequila snob. Also, I was recently on Tormenting Tarmac with Mr. Jhae. So you can check out the Tormenting Tarmac episode featuring myself. We had a great conversation. He will be coming on this podcast much sooner than later. So after this word from Arcus Foundry, Mr. Ron Evans and the Vault. Business tech feeling whack? Too many tools, too much chaos, not enough time? Arcus Foundry is here to fix that. With SparkForge, you get a unified platform that connects everything you need. Your website, social media, phone systems, and more. There is no need for an expensive IT department or dealing with a bunch of separate systems. It truly is the all-in-one solution that saves you time and helps your business run smoother. Head over to arcusfoundry.com and use the code HARDPARKED to get your first month free. Upgrade your tech and get back to business. Ron Evans, how you doing?
Thanks for having me on.
Tell us about you. I want to know about you because we kind of know each other. I did an event here. You have a beautiful NSX behind you, and then we see each other maybe once or twice a year. But we need to know how you got here.
Born in a small town in Missouri called Cape Girardeau, Missouri. The home to Rush Limbaugh is the only claim to fame that town has. My great-great-grandparents and now my cousin and his kids have farmed the same land since 1890 on the Illinois side. So young infant running around on the farm, spent my every summer down there. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. My family moved away up to central Illinois, about 3 hours south of Chicago. Small farm towns, 500 people, 1,500 people. And so great place to grow up. You leave after breakfast in the summer and you come back before dinner or supper, as it's called in the Midwest, or when the street lights come on. Parents didn't know where you were. I'm the Gen X that got into all sorts of stuff my parents still don't know about. Ride bikes everywhere, 10, 20 miles outside of town. So grew up skateboarding, BMX bike, got my first motocross motorcycle, raced a little bit of that for fun. And then I was in 8th grade. We moved to Arizona, Safford, Arizona.
Okay, all right.
The armpit of Arizona, and right next to Yuma. No offense to anyone who lives in Yuma, but so the one benefit is that our house was right across the street and down an alley was the open desert. Mm-hmm. So every day after school, there's not much else to do in that town. We were out in the desert riding motorcycles, 3-wheelers. I got my first 3-wheeler. So I grew up in the
was it a Honda, Yamaha? Who all made it back then? Honda?
Honda 110 and then a 185 and then the 250R, which was a 2-stroke first suspension on a 3-wheeler. Used to jump those, raced them. In fact, I once came up what I thought was just a hill. Turned out it was a berm that cut off, and I jumped about 30 feet in a three-wheeler with no suspension and bounced and threw me off and knocked me out cold and separated my shoulder.
Yikes.
I woke up 4 hours later in the desert when it's dark.
No one was around.
No one's around. Steering wheel or the handlebars are crooked, and I drove 3 or 4 miles back to my house, hit it, covered it up, fixed it so my parents would never know about it, and had a friend put my shoulder in, and that still gives me problems to this day.
Was it just like the movies? How do you remember? Were you slamming your shoulder against the corner, or how did that work?
I did.
Oof.
With a friend holding me and then shoving me hard against it. And it's now had rotator cuff surgery, but I don't know that it'll ever be right. By the time I was 10, I had broken 7 or 8 bones. Unfortunately, back then the casts were plaster. Well, I thought it'd be cool to hang on to them as trophies. So they were all underneath my bedroom in the basement of our house. One of those, after 7 or 8 of them, my mom couldn't figure out what the smell was coming from my bedroom, and I got yelled at for keeping them. But if there had been Child Protective Services back then, I would have been taken away from my parents.
All the stuff.
My first concussion was at age 2, crashing a tricycle into a curb and going off the tricycle and hitting my head on the sidewalk. So I was one of those kind of kids.
Sounds like 3 wheels isn't really your thing.
No. So I graduated from 2 wheels to 3. Quads weren't even out back then.
Right.
But if it went fast, that's what I wanted. I was an adrenaline junkie from the time I could walk. We moved to Phoenix middle of my junior year. I still have my first car from high school.
Which is?
Parked back in the back, 69 Triumph GT6. The only coupe that Triumph really ever made, the first 6-cylinder they had done. The car I pushed more than it drove because it broke down all the time.
We're going to take a look at that.
It's had 4 motors and 2 paint jobs. It was painted at a prison. It was 2 shades of British racing green. And my dad was the superintendent. High school principal had finished restoring a 53 Triumph and had signal red was the color and had a couple gallons of it. And so I stripped everything off the car, the chrome, the glass, drove it up to the prison with the paint. They had a paint booth for their work program at the prison outside of Safford, and for $50, they painted my first car.
And that's how it ended up being 2 different colors?
And then, no, it was already 2 different colors.
Oh, okay.
And then we painted it red, and then I spent a week hand rubbing out the paint to get rid of the orange peel, because there weren't really buffers back then, or not that I had. I
feel like most people would have just let it be.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's just not the way I was wired. I had 3 cars before I was 18. I blew the motor in the Triumph, and we towed it from Safford to Phoenix when we moved to Phoenix.
It's a long way.
Yeah, my dad wasn't happy about that one. Had a Fiat X19 with a removable target top. And then in my senior year in high school, had sold that, bought a 77 Toyota Celica. This is pre-JDM.
Right, yep.
Celica had been lowered, fiberglass flares molded on, side skirts, front air dam, and a 930 Porsche whaletail fiberglassed into the trunk. So
is there a photo of this thing
I've got a couple of photos, not here, but I've got a couple of photos left. All white. It was the 80s, so Miami Vice, whited out, white bra on the front. This is pre-PPF. With a sticker, Sammy Hagar's I Can't Drive 55 with a line through it, with a 6-cylinder dropped in from an 84 Celica. I bought the car, I had literally in late 84. And so that car saw a fair amount of street racing, Coney shocks and lowered. Wasn't fast in a straight line, but it could beat any muscle car around the corner. So I terrorized the streets of Phoenix in high school.
So around a corner. So are these like the ones we would see in movies where it's almost like a closed
It would have
course?
been in a Fast and Furious movie today, but it was in the 80s.
That's wild. That's wild.
Big white vinyl across the top of the windshield, windows all tinted limo black, 18 speakers with 2 subs and 3 amps.
What were you playing? You remember?
Journey and Foreigner were my 2 favorites. In the 70s, that would have been Kiss, but I had started to grow out of that by the time we got to the 80s. I was a big 70s rock and roll fan. So that car ended up, before there were Cars and Coffee in Phoenix, in the 80s, there were audio competitions every weekend.
Oh, yeah. That was a big thing in the 80s
Yep.
and then through mid-90s.
I was sponsored and competed for a couple of years with that car.
Wow.
We tried out different speakers, different amps. We once put 22 speakers in a big 70s Cadillac with one 45-watt amp to drive them at a half an ohm. So we experimented. The guy that worked it was called Cardinal Car Stereo over in Glendale, was in my wedding as one of my groomsmen. So I'll put it that way, as far as how much time I spent there. Made our own speaker boxes, made our own door panels, hid all the speakers, all the stuff that became popular later. We were doing back then, had the first Pioneer, had the first CD player in Phoenix when those came out for an in-dash CD player. So now the 6-disc changers have been around early 80s. So that was a fun car. We went to high school at Phoenix Christian just for that. I could have graduated my junior year. My dad wouldn't let me. So I took 2 classes my senior year and then took a full load at Phoenix College. So I started Grand Canyon as a sophomore. So it was all my life I'd either wanted to race cars or be a car designer. So I was an art and design major at Grand Canyon for 2 years. I had been drawing cars since I was little. All through high school I took mechanical drafting, drawing, and then art major, wanted to be a car designer, just loved drawing cars. And
did you finish that program?
No.
What happened?
So after my sophomore year, we went, halfway through my junior year, we went and applied and went to tour Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, which is where Chip Foose, about every significant car designer comes out of that college.
It's one of the top 2, I believe.
They practically laughed at me. They said, this was in the 80s, we get 2,000 applicants a trimester, because they had 3 semesters a year, and they accept about 100. And they said most of ours are master's degree in art, come back in 7 or 8 years once you've got a master's. And as much as I loved it, I didn't want to spend that much time in school. This was 1987. No, 86. I apologize. I was dating a girl all through high school, 3 years or so, that was going to school to be a medical assistant at what was called at the time Apollo College. Now no longer exists. And so I'm dropping off my girlfriend, and a recruiter grabs me and introduces in typical salesman fashion, pulls me into the office and asks me what I'm doing with the rest of my life. So, and I wasn't sure because I had just gotten back from Art Center interview. And so I ended up enrolling in respiratory therapy. So if you've ever had a loved one or yourself after surgery or in the hospital on a ventilator or life support, it's a respiratory therapist that takes care of that. So it was a 2-year program. It wasn't a degree program back then. Now it is. And so the spring or January 87, start that. In October, we finished it early. So I did clinicals at the VA and St. Joe's Hospital 12 20 years old, and I'm in the ER and the trauma room and the burn unit and at county and some things that most 20-year-olds don't ever see.
Yeah.
And decided to go into the second program. They were just starting up this new program called a therapist, not a technician. And they talked me into enrolling. There were 7 of us. Well, that's how I met my wife. So she was a single mom, divorced, 2 kids. They were 10 and 8 at that time. She was 30. I was 20. Or she was 29. I was 20. And we drove each other crazy because I was working full-time on the night shift. I was going to school during the day, and I was doing clinicals in the afternoon. I'd go 48 hours without sleep, living on no-dose caffeine pills.
Yep, the little white
and
pills.
Jolt Cola and Reese's peanut butter cups. That was my
Somehow
diet.
you're still here in front of me right now. That's bizarre.
Needless to say, I was wired for sound.
Yeah.
So I'm tapping my pen on the desk. I'm kicking the desk with my foot because I've also got a little bit of ADHD. I was a hyper kid back before they knew what to call it. Always had to be doing something. First week of school, Pam says, if you don't do that, stop that, I'm going to break your arm. Well, that weekend, I broke my arm playing volleyball at church. I came in with a cast, full cast from my elbow to my fingertips. And the instructor said, what'd you do? And without even thinking about it, I said, Pam did it. And she goes, fine, then you two can be study partners, because she could write and take notes.
How funny.
So we started hanging out, having 2 kids. We were at her house studying her apartment. This would have been fall of 87. She asked me in January, her daughter was turning 11. She was having 15, 11-year-old girls going to Great Skate, which was a roller skating rink over in Glendale, because that's where she lived, was off 43rd and Union Hills. And so I helped chaperone this girl's birthday party. And they started playing Chicago's You're My Inspiration. And on one of those couple skate things.
Sure. Yep.
And we were skating next to each other, and I reached over and grabbed her hand. Now, it was safe to be friends because as far as we were both concerned, nothing could ever happen. There's 9 years between us. I'm a single 20-year-old guy, and she's a divorced mom with 2 kids. And our first date was Valentine's Day on that February, 2 weeks later. Our second date was March 9th on her birthday, and I proposed to her.
Wow.
We got married 6 months later.
And how long is it?
It'll be 37 years in September since we were married.
What do you remember about your first date, Valentine's?
So we went on 19th Avenue at Cactus. There was a steakhouse called Lenny Monty's House of Steaks. Went out of business 25 years ago. It was surreal because just a year earlier, I had been dating someone for 3.5 years. That's a longer story we don't have time for in this podcast of what happened there. Jail was involved, a gun, and a murder, and that we'll leave it at that.
You're just going to throw that out there.
I'm just going to throw that out there. We'll leave that for another time. Our first time, even though we've been studying together for 6 months, first time her mom and dad were retired living in Winslow. He had worked for the railroad for 40 years, ran through Winslow, and that was his last place he worked before he retired. She calls up her mom the night I proposed, and her mom said, put him on the phone. I get on the phone, and her mom said, you love them and take care of them, and I'll love you like one of my own. You do anything to hurt them. I will squash you like a bud crawling across the floor and take great pleasure in doing it. Now give me back my daughter.
Yes, ma'am.
So Pam saw the color drain from my face. The next week was spring break for the kids, and she told Pam, come up, bring them up for spring break. I thought we were going up to see them. We get there. Oh, also, through that week before we left that weekend, the next phone call was her telling me that she slept with a .38 underneath her pillow and was a great shot. Her mother-in-law. Now, and she did sleep with a 38 underneath her pillow. My wife's dad worked nights his whole life, so she was by herself at night. And so we get up there, and we get out of the car. So at the time when we met, Pam was driving an 86 Chevy Sprint. For those of you that don't know, it's 3-cylinder motor, which is 2 chipmunks and a squirrel. The version of the turbo was to turn off the AC when you're going downhill. 12-inch tires, 12-inch wheels.
3-cylinder sitting out there that I limped in on. So
This car was tiny. It looked like a clown car. Yours is bigger than her Sprint was. So I told her I could not marry her driving that car. That was all she could afford at the time. So we sold just about everything we could, and I leased an 86 Mazda 626 Turbo with a factory aero kit, white wheels, similar to my Toyota that I wish I still had. So get up there, and I think we're going inside, and she puts up her hand at the door, and she said, "No, just the kids." And I turned to Pam, and I said, "Do we get them back?" What her mom wanted to do was to grill the kids all week about who I was. You know, do they like me? Do they approve? All of that. So we drive back down 3 hours from Winslow, left the kids there, said, "Come pick them up next Sunday." We go up next Sunday. Like, yeah, I'm going to stay in the car this time. I'm not. She comes out. She goes, "What are you doing in the car? Come on in," and hugs. And I was accepted because the kids had given me a seal of approval. Now, both of our parents didn't want us to get married. Thought we were making the biggest mistakes of our life.
Age difference, you're young, she's got the kids,
previous
all that good
marriage,
stuff.
kids, age difference, you name it.
Yeah.
I showed my dad the engagement ring, and he goes, "I could have given you more ideas for a birthday present for her," because I proposed with the ring at the same restaurant on her 30th birthday. And so my best man, who was my best friend, tried his best to talk me out of ever getting married. We had no money. Respiratory in those days was making $6 an hour, maybe $8 if you're on the night shift. Trying to, pay past bills that she had from a divorce and keep food on the table. We got married what was First Southern Church next to Grand Canyon. The college now owns that property. We were from 2 different churches. Both pastors were there. What I didn't know, part of the service was to kneel down so the pastors could pray over you. And my best man had taped "Help Me" to the bottom of my shoes that the whole crowd saw. So we had always wanted to go to, or we were looking at these honeymoon spots as we were planning the wedding. And a friend donated the flowers. Another friend donated the food. We had zero money to put a wedding on. Her mom made both the wedding dress and the cake.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The day before the wedding, she calls and she said, "It's raining in Winslow. I've got an open bed." Her truck was a 72 Chevy C10. She goes, "I've got an open bed truck and 5 layers of cake." So we hauled up there the day before our wedding to bring the cake down. Had the wedding. We couldn't afford really a honeymoon, and we couldn't get the time off. We were both working 12-hour shifts, 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. So we decided to go to Colorado Springs, which she and the kids had lived in after the divorce for 3 years. What I didn't tell her is that week before the wedding, I got a nice little letter from our Arizona MVD that I had accumulated too many points and my license was suspended for 6 months.
Oh.
So I hadn't shared that with her. I was caught street racing, and back then it was just 3 different tickets: speeding, exhibition of speed, and I don't remember what the third one was, but I got 3 in one night.
From the same stop?
Treating some construction cones like a slalom course.
Which everybody's wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I'm glad I've actually met someone who's actually done it.
It was a blast. I'll tell you, it was midnight. I thought, okay, no one's around. Down 19th Avenue around Thunderbird and Cactus. He got me. It was all of I think $100 fine. Nowadays, I would have been put in jail probably, and my car towed away. Mm-hmm. So I still didn't tell her when we left. So we hop in the car. You're going up through Payson to go to Colorado Springs, and we're about halfway to Payson. And off I pass, sitting off in the woods, an unmarked Bronco that I just knew it. And sure enough, as soon as I passed him, the old-fashioned gumball light that's magnetic goes on top of it, and he starts after me. I get up about 2 miles, and I pull over, and I wake her up. My shoes are off because I used to drive barefoot or with my socks. I wake her up from a dead sleep, and I say, quick, change places. And she's confused. She's waking up. She goes, starts to open the door. I said, no, we have to do it inside. There's a limo tent on the windows. And she didn't really even ask why. She's half asleep, did it. She had just pulled her seat up, thinking that we were changing drivers for some reason. And there's on the window. She rolls down the window, and the look on that cop's face was priceless. To see a redheaded, short woman driving this white Mazda 626 Turbo that also had the same audio system that used to be in the Toyota Celica, because I took everything out and put it in that. He goes, ma'am, do you have any idea how fast you were going? And she didn't. She goes, no, and it's our honeymoon. It's a new car. And she put on...
She kicked right in the mode.
And she was clearly surprised and stressed. So it wasn't an act. She clearly... And we're on our honeymoon, and, it's a new car. And he goes, well, hang on. And he goes back. We've got a temporary plate on, runs the temporary plate, comes back, and he goes, ma'am, that little green light on the dash, when that comes on, the turbocharger, that means the turbocharger's on. And
so he knew a little bit about cars.
And she was raised with 4 brothers. They used to hang her by her ankles upside down to find the bolt that they dropped in the engine compartment. Her mother drag raced with her older brothers through the 60s and 70s. So, yeah, she was, a car girl, but he wrote her a warning, comes back, goes, well, consider this your honeymoon, your wedding present. Don't let that little green light with the turbo come on. You folks have a nice day. And she rolls up the window and whacks me and said, how fast were you going? I said, well, when I saw him, 135 and a 55. So that was a very quiet ride to start my honeymoon, with her driving all the way. It was a 12-hour drive to Colorado Springs. Very quiet drive, and not your normal honeymoon. So my first taste of speed, and I would say, even though I always loved cars, I was 5 years old, city of 500 people. Our next door neighbor had a 427 Cobra. This was 72. And every Saturday he would give us kids rides. When it's in the middle of the winter and there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, he would open the garage and start it up and let us jump in and pretend we were driving. And you could hear that car all over the neighborhood. So at 12, I managed to wrangle a passenger seat ride in a Pro Stock car, a 6-second Pro Stock car. Went 180 and loved every minute of it.
How'd you pull that off?
So a friend of mine's dad owned the car. He was 3 years older, and he looked probably 17. He told his dad that I was 16 and had a license, and I was, I think, 12.
Right.
And strapped me in, gave me a helmet 3 times too big for my head, and we went down a quarter mile, 6 seconds.
Wow.
That's how we started our married life, though, was with me get a warning at 135 and a 55. Kids were 11 and 9, so by the time I was 30, I was a grandpa. My daughter got married at 20, so basically 9 years after we had gotten married in 88. She had 5 kids before she was 30. So I was a grandpa almost when most of my kids were still having their kids. I, to this day, have friends that their kids are the same age as my grandkids. So my son
It's bizarre, isn't
was
it?
36 when he got married and has a 7 and an 8-year-old. My daughter's kids are 15 to 25. I have two great grandkids that are fantastic, Parker and Palmer. All of the Mindy's 5 kids start with an A, so Pam used to call them her A team.
Nice.
So really, I'm just a product of the 80s. To me, selfishly, my opinion only, the best music decade of all time was in the 80s. Some of the best movies that everyone still watches today came out of the 80s. The first Top Gun and Risky Business, and
Let's just see you name 2 Tom Cruise back to back there.
I don't remember if the first Bad Boys was in the 80s. That
was the 90s, yeah.
Early 90s.
Yeah.
So all of the pop movies, but that's my jam when it comes to music.
That's back when they made songs specifically for movies.
You can actually
Kenny
hear
Loggins
the words,
collection.
and they made them specifically for the movies. Kenny Loggins wrote Danger Zone for Top Gun.
Yep.
And you instantly, if you hear that song on the radio, you know that that's for that song. Beverly Hills Cop, Back to the Future,
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah,
All of
that's-
those, the
yep.
music was as good or better than the movies were. So we spent 20 years working ICU, trauma, ER. I did some helicopter transport where it's either a nurse, a doctor, or a respiratory therapist with a patient and a pilot. Everything from a fixed-wing plane up to Chinle in the north part of Arizona on the reservation, landing on a dirt runway in the middle of winter with crosswinds blowing and you feel like you're just a paper airplane, to a helicopter transport in the middle of a monsoon.
Is that kind of the craziest trip you had?
Yes.
I can't even imagine. I've
I
never
was
been in a helicopter.
It was called Aerovac was the company. And so understandably, when we got married, having 2 kids, and she had been working since 86, so she had been in the field a year longer than me. We both went back for the therapist program. She goes, I'll let you drive anything with 4 wheels that we can afford, but no bikes. So I sold all of my toys and bikes before we got married, and I haven't been on a motorcycle since then. Probably the scariest ride was on the back of a motorcycle at 125 or 130. That was one I swore I'd never do again.
Was there something that happened on that ride, or is just the fact that
No,
you're on the back
just
of a
that
bike
you had
going
no
about 30?
control.
Right.
Adrenaline and type A's tend to be control freaks, and a wayward bug or a bird and you're both dead, because we didn't have leathers on. We had a helmet, but that was it.
Yeah.
So, and then I worked both the neonatal ICU with preemie babies, pediatric ICU. Pam did adult ICU, from open heart, post-open heart surgeries to neurologic ICU, where car wrecks or head injury patients. And then we both worked other hospitals for extra money on our off days. When my daughter got engaged, we didn't really have any money to pay for the wedding. I worked 93 12-hour shifts in a row to pay for that wedding.
Wow.
Passed out twice, went to the emergency room twice, but I worked 93 12-hour shifts in a row, because what was going to be a small wedding turned into 500 plus at the wedding and 300 at a seated sit-down reception. His parents paid for the alcohol, thankfully.
Yeah.
That bill was more than the food was, but that was the only way we could afford it, was the overtime to pay for the wedding.
Would you say it was rewarding working in the medical industry, or at times depressing? Because it can wear on you, I'm sure.
It does,
Shift
and
in
it
to shift
did,
out.
and be rewarding at the same time. There is nothing better than having a sick child, a 6-month-old or a 2-year-old come in needing heart surgery. There's nothing more crushing than watching this tiny little baby with open heart surgery and tubes coming out of them.
Jeez.
But 4 days later, when they're running around the ICU and they're trying to catch them because they don't know they're supposed to be sick,
Yeah.
is the most rewarding thing I've ever had in my life. Next to being able to raise my kids and have grandkids. But after the last year, I worked both in an outpatient pulmonary clinic that dealt with cystic fibrosis patients, which is a terminally ill lung disease. I went to 8 or 9 funerals that year of kids that had passed away. The last one being one that I worked on at the clinic when she was a baby being diagnosed. When she got sick, I was her caregiver in the ICU on the ventilator. And I got a call at 3 a.m. from the parents for me to remove her breathing tube to let her go. That just broke me.
Yeah.
So we both gave notice and went to work for a medical device company doing clinical education. It turned into a sales job, which neither one of us really liked. But when you're selling something you know can help patients, you believe in it. We were very successful. They sold the company. We both got laid off on the same day. Most of our 37 years have all been spent working together.
That's amazing.
And we started a small company for someone who had no knowledge, but he had financial resources. And we started a small medical equipment company in 2001 with the promise that if we built it to $1 million the first year, we would get 10% ownership. We started with nothing, 1 employee, ourselves, and we built it to $1 million in the first year. And he came to me and he said, I don't remember ever having that conversation.
Of course.
And I learned the importance of the words from Ronald Reagan, trust but verify, because I didn't have it in writing. It was a handshake, which is how I was taught to do things. It's how I was raised. I said, I'm going to go home and we'll have this conversation tomorrow, thinking, okay, he's going to come to his senses. Next day, didn't remember that conversation. First time I've ever left a job, and I didn't have a job. Now, because I always left on good terms, one thing that I was taught with the work ethic and building relationships from working on the farm and different jobs. I mean, my parents were middle class, upper middle class, but didn't believe in any allowances. So if I wanted spending money, from the time I was 8, I had a paper route when they had those, rake leaves, mowed lawns, whatever it was to make my money to buy the first motocross bike, to buy the first motorcycle. And so I left, but because I had left on good terms with them not wanting me to leave, I'd made one phone call to Phoenix Children's and I was invited back and I was working the next day. It was a much easier time with paperwork and HR.
Sure.
Because I'd only left, 8 or 9 months earlier. Pam got a job the next day with one phone call to one of the doctors we had worked with. We worked a couple other places, and then in 2006, all of the doctors that we had worked with, they were still residents when we were at mostly Good Samaritan, which is now Banner University down in McDowell, was a teaching hospital. And when we decided 10 years later to start our company in 2006, they were all now in private practice. So when we started up our company, we took a home equity loan on our house, which we rented the first few years. We bought our house in Scottsdale in 1994. We took a home equity loan of $100,000 and had one employee in 800 square feet. 12 years later, almost to the day, we sold the company.
Nice.
That was 90 to 100 hours a week for that 12 years, which is I was used to, but it meant I missed a lot of family birthdays, anniversaries, kids stuff. So my only regret is that I had to do that to make the company successful, but I missed some of my now they were teenagers very quickly growing up. They were actually graduated high school and now married and out in the world. But
You just said something pretty important, though, is the grind. Mm-hmm. You see the beginning, you see the end, and that's what people see, but they don't understand the grind. And I don't know how much that's even changed today with Alice.
I worked
everything.
2 or 3 jobs from the time I was 8 years old.
Right.
To earn money for my first car, I worked McDonald's at $3 an hour in 1983. I sold off bicycles and 3-wheelers to afford the $800 for the down payment, and my dad co-signed a loan for $800. Payments for $40 a month was my first car. In high school, I worked full-time back when Christown Mall was still around. I worked at the same shoe store in college. And then when I was working, we worked different hospitals on call on the weekends or on our off days because they paid you more. And so we've worked at just about every hotel or hospital, in this valley at one time or another, from Sun City West to Chandler. I wouldn't let her work at county because being down there is not safe for anyone at night, let alone women. So, not to be chauvinistic, but when they carry 9mm in the emergency room with Phoenix PD, that's not.
Yeah.
And leaving at night in the middle of a not great neighborhood. So, I worked at county a lot on my off days. And when we started that company, it was 80 to 90 hours plus. And then we started ours. And I stayed on to run it for 2 more years. So from 06 to 2020, it was 90 to 100 hours a day.
Do you remember the feeling you two had when you signed on that line? And then thinking back to where you started with literally nothing but each other and a couple kids.
So 5 years into it, 2011, Medicare was about 90% of our income because you bill insurance and they pay you. We'd opened up a second branch in Sun City in 07. And in 2011, Medicare somehow decided that second branch wasn't legal. It was, but they made an error and they held our money, all of their money, for 6 months. We hawked wedding rings. We didn't take a paycheck for 6 months. We didn't lay off. At that time, we had maybe 50 employees. We didn't lay anyone off. We had started a branch up in Prescott. I bought a small company in Prescott and turned it around from almost going out of business and grew it to be one of the most profitable branches we had. And obviously I wasn't sleeping much because we had pushed off creditors as far as we could push them. And we were probably 30 days away from going bankruptcy. And at 3 a.m., I check our bank account and they dumped $2 million from 6 months worth of billings into that account. And I screamed, gave my wife a heart attack.
Yeah.
And I said, Medicare finally paid us. Didn't pay us any interest. Didn't say I'm sorry. Just a letter that says this branch is now approved. And that's all we had. My asthma that I have came from being a respiratory therapist. A lot of people don't know that because they don't say it much. 20 years old, I'm on the research team at St. Joseph's, giving experimental meds to kids that have a respiratory virus called RSV. That was a brand new virus in the 80s. They didn't tell us a couple of years after. A lot of people were coughing and they didn't have us in protective, mask and gowns, and they gave it to just about everybody that came in with a sniffly nose. We also were giving pentamidine, which is a medicine, put it in an aerosol for HIV patients. Now they give that in a ventilated hood that sucks all the air up into a carbon HEPA filter. So there were 5 of us on that research team. I was in my 20s. They were in their 40s. 3 of the 4, I think, were smokers. They were dead in their late 40s or 50.
Wow.
My symptoms started 3 years after chronic bronchitis, sinus infections, no family history of asthma or allergies, so they didn't diagnose me with it. Then the chronic infection started from your sinuses being full and draining in your lungs. 30, and I was remodeling our house that we had bought, was a house built in the 70s, scraping the popcorn off the ceiling, which has asbestos. Paint had lead in it because it's 76 was the last year they let lead be in the paint. And a wet, moldy insulation from the leaking roof collapsed on top of me, and I inhaled wet, moldy insulation into my lungs. So my asthma was mildly irritating. I had a sinus surgery that got better. And then at 30, I ended up in the ICU, just about ready to go on a ventilator. They made the argument, and I refused, because to this day, asthma patients have less than a 5% survival rate once you put them on a ventilator, because the pressure goes in and it pops their lungs like a balloon, and they end up passing away from complications. So I refused, and I spent 3 weeks in the ICU, 3 weeks in the floor unit, and I was off work for a year and a half on a BiPAP machine, which pressurizes air and forces it into your lungs. Oxygen at 30 years old, home IVs, IV steroids. And after 2 years, I went back to work at the clinic, and my lung function was 20% of normal at 30 years old. They were going to put me on the lung transplant list, which requires you to be 20% or under for 2 years. Didn't know whether I would make it out of that at 30 years old. I eventually recovered. Took another 3 months to get all of the rest of the fluid then accumulating in my lungs out of there, and went back to work with about a 60% lung capacity. But it started a 10-year of what started at 40 milligrams of steroids. In every hospitalization, you get IV steroids, which are 4 times as powerful. By the time I got to 40, I was 325 pounds and was on 80 to 100 milligrams a day of prednisone, which a normal dose in the hospital is 40 milligrams. I was in the hospital 3 or 4 times a year for pneumonias and asthma attacks. I got IV steroids in the emergency room. I used to do them at home, which not the safest, and they won't even do them in the emergency room anymore.
I'm kind of stuck on you at 340 pounds.
325.
325. Wow. Okay.
I've got a picture in my office. I'll show you after we're done. I don't want to show that picture on camera.
That's fine.
So as a way to save my life, he said, we've maxed everything we can. Your body, steroids wrecks your body. Yep. I get bruises if you touch me because my blood's too thin. They slow down your metabolism, and they convert to sugar, so it raises. I would have been diagnosed as a diabetic. My resting blood sugar was 180 when they took it, right before my weight loss surgery. The pulmonary doctor called Robin Blackstone, who had been doing weight loss surgeries, just them, for almost 10 years and was really a pioneer. She's written books about it. She, at the time, was working at Scottsdale, Jhae, or what's now Honor Health. And he said he won't last another 5 years with that weight and being steroid dependent. She goes, it's not, and I had a horrible diet. I ate fast food 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, working night hours, weird hours, day shift, night shift, back to back. I drank a couple 2 liters a bottle of soda. That was my caffeine to stay awake in the hospital instead of coffee. So horrible eating habits, horrible diet. And he convinced her to let me have the weight loss surgery. She didn't want to do it. And he convinced her that I would likely die if I didn't. I lost 170 pounds in 6 months. 6 months later, I was 155 pounds and looked like a survivor from a concentration camp.
Right.
Pale, just, lost a bunch of my hair because they didn't have me on enough protein supplements. They didn't think I would. I never even went to the gym. It just melted off. They made me go cold turkey on steroid, the prednisone, sugar, caffeine, 6 weeks before the surgery.
Oof.
I was not a nice person to be around. My wife tells me that I was probably how she was going through menopause. But they were thorough back then. Now, if you can pay the money and you can, they'll do surgery on you. I had to do a 400 questionnaire, a psych visit, psych eval, because what people don't realize is that there is a higher than normal incidence of suicide in people that have had weight loss surgery. Because if you don't work and have a healthy self-image of yourself when you're fat, it's not going to magically get better when you're skinny. Now, I was the same person inside, but I was, between the long hours and bad food and the prednisone, I kept putting on weight.
Right.
So I went 6 years with no prednisone after that surgery. And instead of 4 or 5 times a year for 10 years that I was in the hospital, I think I've been in the hospital 4 times in 15 years, maybe 5 times. And most of those have been in the last 5 years. So that incident with the wet, moldy insulation left some permanent scar tissue in my lungs and chronic infections. On my best day, I've got about 40 to 45% of my lung capacity. Normal person uses 20 when you're talking and walking. So it doesn't take me much at all before I get very winded and I'm coughing. The difference is I used to cough and cough and cough and cough and cough until people thought I was dying. Because it's that deep, nasty mucus cough. I once popped a lung on its own driving to altitude.
Oh.
I didn't know it, so we turned around. My oxygen saturations went down in the 70s. I was 35 or so. So we drove back down. It's Christmas Eve. We get home that morning. We go to church that night, stand up to sing Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and it felt like someone had shot me in the lung, just popped a hole, and I collapsed right there in the church. 2 friends carried me out. There was a little side office next to, and there happened to be a pulmonary doctor who was visiting the church for the first time, sitting 6 rows over.
Wow.
So he followed me out. He diagnosed it just by watching me and listening to me. That church at that time had a full-time nurse on staff all the time. EMS was there in 3 minutes because the fire station was just down the street from, this was Central and Bethany in North Phoenix Baptist Church. And I had what's called a pneumothorax. I've since had a few of them, but that was the one where from being in the altitude and weakened lungs and coughing burst. It was a small hole and it fixed itself. Small ones will usually heal themselves. But so needless to say, I've had a few close calls over the years. Most people now only know me as a car person.
I think when we did a site visit in 22, you had like a mini spell.
I did. So just a year and a half ago, I ended up in the ICU on a ventilator for only the second time in my life besides surgeries. I also am what we'd call in the trade a lightweight, meaning that it doesn't take much anesthesia to put me out. My mom has it. My grandmother had it. So for whatever reason, it's in our blood. And my wife has actually pulled the breathing tube out of me after surgery more than once. Yeah, I've had some close calls over the years, and this recent one was coughing up blood, which I'd never done in my life. But the those different points cause you, unfortunately, it didn't really give me the wake-up call I needed to slow down. So back to your question about that feeling, we had been working on the deal to sell our company for 4 months at least. We were scheduled for our 30th anniversary to go to Italy for the first time. We were leaving on a Friday. This is Wednesday. And I said, guys, I'm leaving for my honeymoon, whether this deal closes or not. Because they were typical. Lawyers are arguing over the language. Contract was 160 pages long. And so we gave our signatures at midnight. And back then, you still faxed things. You didn't scan them and email them. We faxed them to our attorney at midnight with our signature pages of all of our signatures. There were 14 signature pages. She had bought me a Mont Blanc pen. I'd always wanted one, couldn't afford it. She bought me one, and we saved it. I had it for 2 years without using it until we did that contract. And I used it to sign the contract. We both had to sign.
Sure.
They held the signatures in escrow, and the deal closed while we were halfway through the flight on the way to Italy. So there was no Wi-Fi on planes in 2018. So we got there, and we were in coach. We sure didn't think we could afford first class, had never flown first class, and landed, and I had probably 200 emails and 250 texts and voicemails because it had been announced. They sent out a press release. It was a private equity company that bought us. So I was sitting in the airport when I found out our company had finally sold. I knew we were close. Mm-hmm. It didn't really sink in, but it was the most relaxing trip I have ever had.
Good for you.
So, actually, come think of it, that was our second trip to Italy. We went to Lake Como, and all we did all week was just sit on the deck and look at the lake. And every evening, it would rain across the lake. Most relaxing trip I've ever had.
Good for you.
So, it took me about 2 weeks. My plan was to work 5 years, 2018. After about 18 months, I knew with someone else owning the company and making a lot of changes, I could not do this. So I gave him 6 months notice. I left. As it turns out, good timing is better to be lucky than good. I left the month the first COVID diagnosis hit the U.S. Asthma, compromised immune system, healthcare business, sick patients coming in.
No one really knows what's going on.
No.
Yeah.
So
Crazy
within,
times.
I think it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the first COVID patients, I was out of there. It took me about 2 weeks at sitting at home for my wife to agree that she needed me to go find a hobby. I've never played golf, didn't have any goal of doing that. I had no idea what I was going to do. I hadn't really planned on anything because I thought I was going to be working for 5 more years. So I was 52 years old when we sold. I stayed on the board a couple years after that, but after a couple weeks, I started looking. Back up a second, I found this land. I'd outgrown the building that I used to have for just my cars. I had about 3/4 of these signs and 3,500 square feet. So it was a tight fit. I had outgrown.
Was that in the same general area?
Yeah, it was just across the air park on Hayden and Redfield. I had outgrown it, so I was looking for a slightly bigger building to move my cars to. And I was looking at a building just down the street. I looked at Jordan's building. Shout out to Jordan, goes by Lowballer GTR. Fantastic collection, fantastic person. I had looked at that building, and it's a bit narrow, and I'm like, yeah, this may be hard getting cars in and out. But I ended up buying the pool table that he had up top that he was going to include in the building. And I said, well, what if I just buy the pool table from you? So the pool table I had came out of the building that Jordan owns now. And I was looking at a building down here that actually used to be called the Vault. That's not how I got the
It's like right
idea
around the
for the
corner
name.
somewhere, right?
It's literally 4 buildings down.
Okay.
It was sitting empty. It was owned by now the owner of Podium Racetrack. And I saw a little for sale sign by owner. And this was a parking lot used by Wright, Honda, and Toyota to park their overflow.
Shout out to Right Honda and Right Toyota.
Yep. That was when dealers actually had overflow. This was, 2019 pre-COVID. And they still parked their cars after I bought the land. But it took us 2 years for permits. So I need something to do. We had finished, or I can't say finished. I was changing things right up until the time we finished. So I rented a small warehouse around the corner that's next to Craig Jackson's personal collection. And I started buying cars, fixing them up, and flipping them. Developed friends with a good mechanic that was working at Barrett Jacks at the time, used to work for Gas Monkey. And he would do the mechanical stuff. I would help out with what I could do. And so we probably did 15 cars out of that warehouse over the span of a couple years. My lease was up. There was a shop for older cars right in front of us. They took the space over. And I had agreed on the original building that I had to rent it out for a year after I sold it. So I got frustrated with the architects. So my first idea was this was just going to be 8,000 square feet for my stuff. And I was looking at other businesses to buy because I love cars. I've always been a car person. I'm like, maybe I'll find, there were a couple tent and wrap shops for sale. There was a dealership for sale, although I didn't really want to do car sales. So I was going to build just a building half the size and go buy another business or start one. And then I was meeting with the architects, and they said, well, the city, this is an acre. And they said, well, the city will let you build 16,000 square feet. That's when the light bulb went on. I've stored my cars and friends' cars for years. But at the same token, I've been in just about every car storage place that there is in this town before I started this. And in fact, looked at one that was for sale at the time. I won't say which one because they're still in business. I looked at the books and they weren't really making much money, just doing storage. And so when LG was the commercial company that built this building, I essentially told them, just give me the outside shell and let me design. Right. Going back to my roots of designing things, I drew out how I wanted the lounge to look, how I wanted the conference room to be. I wanted no beams in this, so it's clear span. This was about as big as we could make width-wise without having to buy trusses that are twice as tall. So it turned into, okay, now we need to, going back to looking at the books of a couple of storage places for sale, I said we need something else to do. And we decided before we ever finished that we would rent it out for private events. I didn't have any social club when we started. We were open for 3 weeks, and I got a rather panicked call from McLaren of Scottsdale. They were the Arizona's Hennessy dealer. And they said, can you host a party for 150 for Hennessy with their new Venom supercar? I said, yeah, sure. When? Tomorrow. They had rented a house, an Airbnb in Paradise Valley, and we're going to have 150 to 200 people at a house in Paradise Valley for an unveil of this supercar. The owners found out. Obviously, that didn't go over well with the owners or the neighbors, and the police wouldn't have. And so I had 24 hours. Now, we had at the time, 10 cars, and I had 2 customer cars. We parked them underneath the stacker. We have 10 stackers, and I had 2 in the middle. So the floor was already empty. They already had the DJ, the catering. It was just getting the announcement out to everyone that had RSVP'd for 175 people or so. And so that helped for a little bit, put us on the map. We had our grand opening party. We had, I didn't know half the people that were there. Now I consider them friends, but back then I was friends with people who knew them.
Right.
We got people to bring in cars to put on display. Scottsdale Ferrari brought a couple Ferraris. We had a mixture of all different cars for our grand opening. But 3 weeks later, we held our first event. And then Hennessy came back the following year. It was during Barrett-Jackson. And so we got a dozen cars within a month after that, just from people seeing our place for the first time. I had never possessed a social media account.
Right.
Until I broke ground on this. People, when I scroll back, they'll find the very first post was a patch of dirt when we dug up the pavement, and we started with a fresh acre of dirt to build the place. I wanted something that I was going to build from the ground up. No other storage in Phoenix. I love a lot of the other ones that are here. They've got some great design things and great buildings, but none of them built it from the ground up. And going back to what I said before of wanting to do something different. So this was my full-time job for 2 years of planning this place. This was during COVID, and the delays and the price increases were starting to happen. I took a chance and I ordered the trusses, the block, plywood, 6 months before we had permits. And we put them here on site with a chain link fence around it. Drove by twice a day just to try to make sure. The trusses took 6 months to do. Everything, the trusses and the block arrived before we poured the slab. The trusses came after. So we poured the slab at 3 a.m., 60 concrete trucks in and out. They were lined up all down Greenway Hayden. We started pouring. One stops, drops a load, drives up 77th Street. Next one comes in. Took about 3 hours to pour 60 concrete trucks for the slab. And but we finished construction in 10 months. We opened 11 months, sorry. We opened December of 21.
When did you decide this is what you wanted to do? Because going back, you said you had your own storage with 3,600 square feet, and you needed to find something else. But you had your own storage with your own cars. When did all that start?
So I bought the building the smaller building I had in 2014, gutted. It was an office condo, gutted it and turned it into a smaller version of what you see here. Still had that 2-post lift in the back, was in my old shop. I had a 2-car wide lift. The neons were in there. I had one office, a bathroom, a kitchen, TV area. After I looked at 30 or 40 commercial buildings in the air park when there was actually inventory, by the time I bought one and remodeled it, I would have more money in it than building it from scratch. So I decided to do this. It would have been late 2019, after looking at a bunch of other businesses that I knew I could make it profitable. We had bought, in my previous life, 9 companies in 7 years.
As far as like when did you decide you wanted to start collecting cars?
Oh, well, I wanted to from the time I was in high school, but I couldn't afford it. I bought my first collector car in 2005, the year before we started our business. The year after we started, we had billed out, we did over $1 million that first year, but we only collected $250,000 of it. We had 10 employees. I had billings waiting for payment of $850,000. And we had no money to hire billers to start billing it ourselves instead of paying someone else to. Only thing I had of value, 67 Ford Mustang. 427 side oiler, ton of Ram, dual quads, just a tire burner. 12.5 to 1 compression, just a hot rod. I sold it in 06 for $75,000, and that was enough to hire 2 people to start doing our billing. The year after, We had collected that over $1 million, and I built my 65 Shelby continuation Cobra with a 511 cubic inch big block. So that Cobra was kind of the pay me back for being willing. As much as I love cars, they're still just stuff. They're not as important as family, friends. They can all be replaced. And so that Cobra was a replacement for my Mustang that I sold. Now, since then, I've had 767 Mustangs, 2 Cobras. I only have the original one, but I had a second one in there at one point. And I probably own 80 cars over the last 25 years.
That's wild.
By the time we sold our business, I think I had 10 or 11 cars. I've always liked all types. Obviously, growing up in the 60s and 70s, I've always loved racing. I grew up in the Midwest where it's dirt short tracks with sprint cars, NASCAR, but I still, I'd catch 24-hour Le Mans on ABC or clips on Wild World of Sports, which is where every hour, every week, they would, before ESPN, they would highlight what had happened in sports. Mm-hmm. So I always loved Le Mans. I loved Indy because we were 3.5 hours away from Indy. Bugged my parents every year until they finally took me when I was 10. And somewhere is a grainy little Polaroid picture of 10-year-old or 9-year-old me standing on the semi-hauler of A.J. Foyt, who was my favorite driver.
That's neat, man.
So I've been to Indy several times since then at the museum. A good friend of mine whose dad raced at Indy just brought me back a brick, one of the original bricks from Indy. A lot of people don't know that track was paved with 3 million bricks in 1911 or so. And they keep that 3-foot strip of bricks, gets replaced about every year and a half because the modern cars wear them out. They've got a warehouse full of these old bricks, but they're about 10 pounds a piece. They're twice as heavy as a brick you would use.
That sounds like a pretty big brick.
It is not much bigger than what you'd see on a brick house. They were just
super dense.
Super dense. So racing is I've always loved watching race. I've always loved going fast. I just couldn't afford to do the things I loved. Selling my company provided, the first thing we did was set up 529 college plans for all of my grandkids. We have 7 grandkids. They all got their colleges funded or mostly funded, depending on where they go. We have had 2 graduate college now. The third one's in college. One just graduated high school, starting college, down to the 7-year-old and we were already debt-free when we sold the company. The company wasn't debt-free, but we were. The house was paid off. We did our remodels with cash. Going back to the way I was raised, if you couldn't pay cash for it, you couldn't afford it. Now, I didn't always live that way because I couldn't afford to, but when I could, we haven't had a mortgage payment since 2018. Actually, 2017, we paid it off the year before we sold the company. Haven't had a car payment. The only time I'd financed a car actually is the NSX sitting behind me. One of the only cars I financed. Interest rates were cheap.
Was that the first time or the second time?
Okay, I was hoping you wouldn't go there. So this car sitting behind me is a 1991 NSX. When they were new, they were $75,000. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. We're 3 years into our marriage. If it wasn't for my mother helping us buy food, our kids wouldn't have had food to eat back then. My couple of friends we had bought 2 of them. And they were, at the time, car and driver, 1991. That car was faster than a Ferrari, than a Porsche, than a Lamborghini, or a Corvette in 1991. And so couldn't afford one, but they let us drive it. And that was both of ours kind of, here's our car that we're going to work towards someday. Someday was in the year before we sold the company, 2017. I could have paid cash, but I'm like, It was one of the first times where, and I think I paid $45,000 for the car. The Cobra was expensive, but it was over time that we paid on it during the build. So I put like half down, and I think I financed $25,000, and I still felt guilty about it for having a car payment.
Right.
We paid it off when we sold the or right before we sold the company. I had it like the note like 6 months. So that car I enjoyed. I put 5,000 miles on it. And the values had started going up. And so being the capitalist that I am, I'm like, hey, I can almost double my money. I sold it for $90,000. I doubled my money. Turns out my wife didn't want me to sell it.
Yeah.
She knew I was selling it, but wasn't happy about it. And so it's been gone about a year and a half. Guy bought it, drove it back to San Diego. Unfortunately, what I found out when my wife said, and my grandson shamed me into saying, you need to find the car. I said, okay, I can find one easy. And they said, no, it needs to be your car. That took a little bit longer because I hadn't saved any of the information from the buyer. I found the name in an old email and so I took a chance and emailed him, not knowing if that email still worked. And that began a negotiation on buying my car back. It showed up to me, and the PPF was the car had been left outside because he didn't have enough room in his garage for it. So it had baked the protective film on the car. It was a pretty spotless car when it left here.
Absolutely.
I've always taken good care of my cars. I drive them and drive them hard, but I also take good care of them. And so we stripped off the PPF, and unfortunately, an original paint car, it took clear off of the fender, so I had to repaint the fender, but still had the wheels I put on it, which are 97 NSX wheels. Actually, they're an inch bigger, Science of Speed, shout out to them. They make one that looks like the 97 wheel, but it's a 17, 18-inch wheel.
Right.
Revs to 8,000 RPM, just a great driving car. It's not the fastest in a straight line, but around a track.
It's pretty good.
I remember a grainy video on VHS back then, back in the day in the 90s of Senna around the Nürburgring with loafers and pants, and barefoot with loafers driving an NSX around the Nürburgring at 140 miles an hour. And so that was always like that car that we both loved. And so buying it the first time was finally finishing that dream. I'm always someone that was raised that you work towards something. It's not what you get from it, it's the journey that you're on. And a lot of people only think about the goal. They don't think about the journey. But it will forever be in the collection, and my grandkids can fight over it when I'm gone.
Nice. How long has it been back? Not that long, right?
It's been back about 2 months now. It'll get PPF next week, and it'll be back on the road. Needs an AC service because it blows hot now instead of cold.
I know a local company that could probably help you out with that.
Yep. It'll go down to them once I get some PPF on it. So about a year or so, 2 years ago, we were completely packed, and I realized that my cars were taking up 20 of my 65 spaces. I started selling off anything that I wasn't going to keep permanently. This NSX was one of them, and I ended up selling off some at Barrett-Jackson's, a couple of Eleanor's, a 56 big window truck, hot rod with 600 horsepower. I'd have built them or bought them, enjoyed them, but I realized that I didn't have the time. I was getting this off the ground, and while I'm not working 80 hours a week, I'm still here every day working, and it just didn't make sense to have them sit and not be driven.
And it's a business, and so you're
Right.
occupying spots that could be
So
for
I was
clients.
taking up 70 grand a year of revenue just in those 10 or so
Right.
cars that I sold off, or 75. So I sold off more cars than my wife probably wanted me to. She was by then just attached to the cars as I am.
Are there any more on the retrieval list? I got to
there
get
are-
that car back.
No, none that are coming back. I've had British cars, European cars, muscle cars. I like them all.
Yeah.
I love an E-Type Jag, but after driving one that we store, I have no desire to buy one. They're great looking cars, one of the most beautiful cars ever made, great road cars, but fitting in them and keeping them from overheating in the summer is just not easy. So I do have a build underway. I'm partnering with a good friend of mine for a track toy that will have a license plate for the street. 800 horse, air cooled Porsche 935 race car.
Nice.
So it'll be done. It'll be at SEMA in the Toyo Tires booth. BZ Moto out of California is building it. Been great working with him. I'd never even met him before. We've done everything over video call and emails, phone calls. Great person to do a build with. He's got some sponsors for SEMA that are kicking in some parts, and Charlie and I worked on the livery. So it'll be a fun car to do. 2,600 pounds.
He's a well-known big name too, so that name pulls some things for sure.
So and I missed my air-cooled 911. I had a 356 Outlaw, was one of those that got sold. There's so few people building 6-cylinder 356s that it already went up in value after a couple of years, and I got more for it than I put in it, which is unusual for a custom build. So there's some more cars I'd love to drive before I die or own before I die, but that may not happen for a while.
What are some of the top 3 or 4?
If I had to only pick one, it'd be a Lamborghini Miura. This was late 70s. They had already went out of production, but a lot of people had the Farrah Fawcett poster, and those of you that grew up in the 70s will know what I'm talking about. Or in the late 70s, early 80s, the Countach poster. I had a poster of a Miura in my room. The original supercar, V12, 170 miles an hour, which in 1967 and 8 came out the year I was born. Not the best build quality, and parts are almost impossible to find. But to me, one of the best looking cars that Lamborghini ever designed.
Don't we have one or two in?
There are none that I know of in
thought
Arizona.
I saw one. Maybe it was in town for
It was
Car
in
Week or
town
something.
for the Arizona Concours, I think, had one for an anniversary for Lamborghini. So, and I've never owned a Lamborghini. I had never owned a Ferrari in my life until 3 years ago. I bought a 550 Maranello gated 6-speed V12. Enjoyed it for a couple years. Sold it. That was one that got sold. I made some money on that. If you buy good cars and you keep them well or sort them out, if you buy them right, then you make money on a car, not when you sell them, but when you buy them, is my humble opinion. But I also don't really do it to make money. At the heart, I'm not the vault guy, which is what I've been referenced to. I've been called worse. I'm really just a car guy who loves cars. I love some of these cars and don't have to own them because I get to look at them every day.
Right.
And I love it when the old ones, when the owner says, "Can you exercise her for me?" And whether it's this Packard here behind you or one of my cars, or we've got a 66 Corvette convertible that's just a great driving car. I love it when they say it needs to be exercised, because that means I get to go drive around cars and enjoy other people's cars without having to buy them. But at the end, I'm just a car guy, and this happens to be the business that I'm in to keep myself busy. I don't need to work at this point, but yet I'm not wired to not be doing something.
What's the hardest thing about running this place?
Best thing about the car community is people. In the same token, as we both know, that can also be one of the detriments depending on the people. When we sold our company, my wife and I had 350 employees, 42 locations in 10 states. when I decided to turn this into a business and not just a small building for me, as we sat down and talked about it, because Pam and I have always done everything together, I said, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I want something easy to manage without many employees. And if I want to, Wednesday, I took what I call a mental health day and went to Apex for the track for 5 hours of driving down there. I drove down 5 hours at the track, drive home. I was thoroughly exhausted, yet mentally it completely clears my mind and was the best stress, for me, this best stress relief I have. But when I have a bad day here, a car won't start, and maybe we've got to swap a battery or jump a car. If you have a bad day working in the ICU, someone dies. So it's a matter of perspective. Are there stresses? Absolutely. It's just not the same level. I was 21 years old, and I'll never forget the moment I was on the night shift at St. Joseph's Hospital in the pediatric ICU, and a 6-month-old baby had had open heart surgery. And back then, they would leave the chest cavity open with a clear sheet of what they put over IVs to keep it sealed and clean. But it's because all the baby's bones haven't hardened yet, and they're still growing. And then after about a week, they would close them back up.
That's wild.
Well, this baby decided their heart stopped beating in the ICU. And instead of taking them to surgery because it was emergent, they peeled that off and they started doing open heart massage. The surgeon, or the ICU doctor, while I was breathing for the baby with a resuscitation bag, we took her off the ventilator. And I didn't really even realize what had happened. Doc said, I need a pair of hands. And I said, no one answered. And I said, what do you need? And there's 8 people around this little tiny crib. And he grabs my arm, and before I know it, I'm doing cardiac massage on a 6-month-old, and I'm 21 years old. That changes how you look at things.
Yeah.
Puke my guts out after that. But I had to grow up very quickly.
Yeah.
Between having 2 kids to raise, I'm halfway in age between my daughter and son and my wife. So I was 21 with an 11 and a 9-year-old and working, taking care of life support machines for kids and babies.
Want to take a look at some of these cars?
Yeah.
All right, let's do that.
People always ask what the favorite car is. Usually for me, the answer is the next one.
Yeah.
If I had to only pick one.
That's like a push. That's a push of an answer, though.
It is. If I had to only pick one, up front is my 2005 Ford GT. We both agreed when we sold the company, we would agree to pick one car each within what we thought would be appropriate as a reward for the last 14 or 12 years of building this business. So she ordered a 570S Spider McLaren, and I bought this Ford GT from the original owner, or it had been one owner. I bought it at a Mecum auction, actually. Prices have gone up a bit since then. This was January of 2019 when I bought that car. So it had 500 miles on it. Never had anything changed, the original tires. So it had an engine out service, and the next day I took it to the track. It blew a 50-cent radiator clamp and sprayed coolant all over the motor. I thought my heart just sunk because I thought I was cooked in the car I'd wanted and spent all this time for. Luckily, it didn't hurt anything, got cleaned up, fixed. But it hasn't been down to the track since then. But my 65 Shelby is one I've wanted since I was 16. So that one took a few years to find the right one, and then also have the funds to do it. But in the same token, Porsches are right there along with Fords.
Okay, we're just going to go around and talk about some of the cars. Just going to pick a handful of cars. Let's go.
That only weighs 100 pounds more than a 5-liter Coyote motor does. It was pushed back 8 inches, so it's truly a front mid-engine car with 50-50 weight.
Yeah, that's way back there.
Yep. Firewall is pushed back 6 inches. So I barely squeeze into the car. So the 65 Shelby GT350 is one that I've wanted one since I was 16. I grew up a Ford family, or I'm sorry, Ford fan in a family full of Chevy lovers. So an original 65 Mustang, I'm the 5th owner. I have registration slips from 1965 when it was first purchased. Been restored 12 years ago, but still looks practically brand new. I've put 3,000 miles on it since I bought it early last year, and one of the cars that will be in the collection forever. Right next to it is the 1994 Toyota T100 pickup. It was owned by my wife's mother, who's since passed away. It was bare bones, other than two-tone paint was the only option. Plastic door panel, dash, roll-up windows. That truck is a great Home Depot truck, but I get offers to buy it from me every time I go to Home Depot. Original paint except for the hood that's been repainted, and will be in our family forever and passed down to our daughter and her kids one day.
Terminator?
Yep. The Terminator was the T1000, I believe. And so when she bought this and it being a T100, I used to joke about it being the Terminator. This is the 69 Triumph GT6. Basically, Triumph put a 6-cylinder in place of a 4-cylinder Spitfire and added a fastback roof. Even though it really isn't, it was nicknamed the Baby Jaguar because if you squint from 20 feet away, it's got the basic outline of an E-Type Jaguar, tilt front end the way the Jag does, wire wheel knockoffs, real knockoffs, and drove all around Phoenix in one of these all summer with no AC. And it's had several motors in it. Hasn't been painted in 15 years. So this car has been driven underneath a monster truck. When you pull up to a light, you're eye level with the UPS driver's wheel or a tire. So you put it on instead of actually get in the car. So my current daily is a 2024 Porsche Turbo S with an M Engineering tune, some wheels and a downpipe, made 800 horsepower at the crank, but a nice comfortable daily. Gets me around town. So at home in my garage is my continuation Shelby Cobra that I've had for over 20 years. Black car. It is the full-size version of this car. The spec is exactly how my Cobra is at home. Black side pipes, street bumpers. This was made by a friend of mine with an electric motor. Does 50 miles an hour. He made a form and hand-poured aluminum bumpers for it, made the windshield, and has an app for you to control the top speed from 2 miles an hour to 50. I had to take out the seats and lay down sideways to drive it because it turned out much smaller than I thought it was going to be. And they put in a regular Cobra steering wheel, which made it much bigger inside a half-scale car. But it's the mini-me of my Cobra. So next to me is my 1938 Alpha 158 recreation. That was this morning's Cars and Coffee car. The theme of Scuderia was cars that don't fit in. This car is fully street legal, registered with a license plate, hidden underneath the seat in case I get pulled over. But in the day, Juan Fangio won his first F1 championship in 1951 in one of these cars. It was the last car Enzo Ferrari worked on running the Alfa Romeo racing team before he started Ferrari. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Let's do it. Hey guys, thank you for checking out the show. If you like what you heard, or even if you didn't like what you heard, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and hit that thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to it on traditional podcast media, go ahead and go over to YouTube and hit that like button. And please subscribe. I'm trying to move everything to YouTube. It's been a lot of good time trying to make these videos. But anyway, so with that being said, I do want to thank the show's sponsors, Right Honda, Right Toyota, Toyota of Huntington Beach, I got to read this, Claremont Toyota, and Gardenia Honda. Can't forget ArcusFoundry.com, and of course, AutoCannon, officially licensed Honda and Acura gear. I want to thank our Patreon business supporters, Kuya Automotive out of Winter Garden, Florida, Automotive Specialty Tool out of Owings Mills, Maryland, The Lucky Brakes, Sports Breakers out of Caledonia, Michigan, Big House Small Home Design, out of Ashburn, Virginia, and Traverse City, Michigan, and the Shade Bros out of Boise, Idaho. If you're in a position to help the podcast upgrade, feel free to either become a member on YouTube, so you get episodes early when they're ready early, which isn't very often, or you can join the Patreon for as little as $3 a month. You get access to bonus audio, bonus video, and exclusive swag, as well as all the normal swag that comes out without having to pay for it. Special shout out to Mark Stoneman, Catherine Cox, Eddie Ramos, Richard Graves, Byron Jones, Bo Jung, Alex Comita, Andrew Bunkley, and Trey Mullins for supporting the show. If you want to email the show, info@hardparking.com. Follow me on Instagram @Pfenning. Follow the show @hardparkingpod. I already told you to subscribe via YouTube, and I meant it.
Shut up!